The house was glowing that night. Every chandelier, every candle, every polished fork was part of a performance that only I understood. The walls of glass shimmered with the reflection of the snow outside, and for a moment, it was hard to tell whether the light came from the fire or from the cold. Christmas Eve. The table stretched between us like a quiet battlefield. I had arranged everything myself. The white porcelain, the burgundy wine, the rosemary sprigs tied with ribbons. It was perfect, painfully perfect, as though perfection could keep the truth from surfacing. Across from me sat my children. My beautiful, intelligent, ruthless children. Leonardo, the oldest, wore the same tailored arrogance as his father once did. His voice carried that tone lawyers use when they expect people to listen. He had his father's confidence but none of his restraint. Clara, my only daughter, looked radiant as always, but her eyes were restless, darting from her phone to the table, her mind somewhere else entirely. And Julian, my youngest, the charming one, the one who could make guilt sound like affection, was already on his second glass of wine. I smiled at them as if this were just another family gathering. In truth, I had been waiting for this night for months. "You've outdone yourself, Mom," Julian said, waving his fork in lazy appreciation. "Everything looks incredible." I thanked him and reached for the carving knife. The roasted lamb was tender, glistening with herbs and oil. The scent filled the air and wrapped around us, thick and nostalgic. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed in the illusion we were performing, the illusion of love, of normalcy, of family. But illusions are fragile things. Leonardo cleared his throat. It was a deliberate sound, loud enough to still the soft chatter around the table. Even the children at the far end went quiet. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said. The words settled in the room like dust. Clara looked up from her phone, Julian leaned back, and I, still holding the knife, paused mid-slice. "Of course, dear," I said gently. "Go ahead." He stood up, adjusting his tie, rehearsing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've been talking. All of us. And we think it's time for some changes." I watched him carefully. "Changes," I repeated. "That's a big word for Christmas dinner." He smiled, relieved that I hadn't interrupted him. "We just want what's best for you, Mom. You've been living alone here for years and this house, it's too much. It's time for you to rest. To enjoy your life without all this stress." Clara joined in, her tone sweet but metallic underneath. "We've even found a lovely place by the coast. A beautiful community. You'd love it. There's a garden, and the staff takes care of everything." I could almost hear Edward's voice echoing in theirs. That same calm authority, the way people sound when they've already decided something for you. Julian put his glass down, pretending to soften the blow. "It's just that we worry about you, Mom. You shouldn't have to do everything alone anymore." There it was, the word that always meant the opposite. Worry. I looked at them one by one and the smile never left my face. They truly believed they were being kind. They thought I was too fragile, too desperate for love, too naive to see the betrayal hiding behind their concern. "That's very thoughtful," I said at last, folding my napkin. "And what would happen to the house?" The silence was sharp enough to cut glass. Leonardo blinked. "Well, we could manage it for you," he said finally. "Just until you decide what to do with it." Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. Julian tried to fill the gap with another forced laugh. "I see," I said softly. "So that's what this dinner is about. Mom, please don't make it sound like..." "Like what?" I asked. "Like my own children gathered around my table to stage an eviction?" No one spoke. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hold its breath. Then I laughed. Not bitterly, not cruelly. Just a small, almost tender laugh that made them uneasy. "You're right about one thing," I said. "This house is too big for me. But don't worry. Soon everything will be settled." They exchanged nervous glances, unsure if I was agreeing or mocking them. I gave them no answer. Instead, I raised my glass. "To family," I said. The three of them hesitated, then followed my lead. The crystal chimed, a fragile sound, delicate as the illusion we were all pretending to believe. I looked at their reflections in the glass walls around us. 3 figures blurred by light, smiling at the woman they thought was still their mother. Inside, I was already miles ahead of them. After the dinner, I moved through the house in silence. The laughter had faded, replaced by the faint hum of the dishwasher and the ticking of the grandfather clock. The air still smelled of wine and roasted meat. They had left not long ago, all three of them, their goodbyes short and polite. They thought they had won. I walked through the living room, my bare feet touching the cold marble floor. Every photograph on the wall stared back at me. Birthdays, graduations, weddings. So many captured smiles, all arranged to tell a story that was no longer true. When I reached the piano, I stopped. The sheet music was still open on the stand. Edward's handwriting, notes from a time when he used to play in the evenings. The ink had faded, but I could still trace the rhythm with my eyes. It had been 5 years since he died. 5 years since I believed I was finally free to shape this house, this family, into something of my own. Instead, it had become a mausoleum built out of lies. I poured myself a small glass of brandy and sat by the window. Outside, the snow kept falling, slow and hypnotic, blurring the world beyond the glass. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint church bells ringing. For a moment I almost felt the ache of love again, the kind of love that forgives everything. But forgiveness is a luxury for those who still believe. I thought about Leonardo's tone, Clara's half-smile, Julian's easy charm. None of them realized how transparent they had become. They had forgotten who taught them how to read people, how to smile when they wanted to scream, how to survive appearances. I took another sip. The liquid burned, but I welcomed the heat. Then, as I set the glass down, my eyes fell on the mantelpiece. A framed photo of Edward and me on our wedding day stood there, dusted in soft golden light. He looked regal, confident, the kind of man who made promises sound like contracts. I reached for the frame, tracing my finger over the edges, and that's when I heard it. A faint metallic sound. A click. The back of the frame shifted. Something small and cold slid into my palm. A key. I stared at it. It was old brass and marked with a number I didn't recognize. Beneath the frame, faintly carved into the wood, were the words "Family Confidential." For a long moment I just sat there, the key resting in my hand, catching the firelight. Why would he hide a key behind a photograph? And what lock did it belong to? The clock struck midnight. The sound carried through the house like a countdown. I slipped the key into my pocket and turned off the lights, leaving only the reflection of the fire dancing on the glass walls. "Soon," I whispered to no one. "Soon we'll see what you were hiding, Edward." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in silence. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt alive. Morning arrived the way it always does in winter, with a pale light that seems to come from under the snow instead of the sky. I woke before the alarm, not from rest, but from a gentle pressure inside my chest that felt like a hand guiding me to my feet. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that listens back. I made coffee in the dark kitchen and did not turn on the overhead light. I let the window glow carry the room. The key lay on the counter where I had set it, small and serious, as if it had its own pulse. I touched it with the tip of my finger. Cold. Steady. Real. I tried to remember every locked thing in this house. There were drawers that stuck from age. There were old trunks that only needed a firm tug. There was the safe in Edward's study, the one I knew, where I kept my passport and papers, where nothing important had ever been found. And there was something else. A memory tugged at me like the loose end of a thread. I took the coffee and the key and went into the study. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The curtains were heavy, the rug a deep blue, and the desk sat like a crouched animal near the window. I opened the top drawer. Pens. Receipts. An old fountain pen with a dried nib. The second drawer was full of envelopes, all empty. The third held a leather-bound notebook with a cracked spine. I set it aside, then walked around the desk and ran my hand along its underside. There, near the back corner, my fingers found a seam. The panel was small. I would have missed it if I did not know how secrets like to live along edges. I pressed gently and it lifted with a soft click. Behind it, a narrow keyhole waited like an eye. My breath changed. I slid the key into the hole. It fit with a clean and unfamiliar grace. I turned it. The desk gave a quiet exhale and a hidden compartment opened from the side, no bigger than a bread box, lined with felt the color of moss. Inside lay a single velvet pouch and a flat wooden box. The pouch was heavy. The box was thin and latching. I started with the box. The latch opened with a sound that was too loud for morning. Inside were photographs. Some I knew, some I did not. Here was Edward holding a baby I did not recognize. Here was a woman on a seaside promenade. Black hair pinned at the nape, a dress that moved like water. Her eyes were smiling at whoever stood behind the camera. On the back someone had written Lucia in a careful hand. I touched the ink. It was faded but not old enough to be a stranger. Under the photographs were letters in a language I could read and yet wished I could not. My name appeared only once, in a line that said she is kind. It was not Edward's handwriting. It was someone else speaking to him about me. The room felt smaller. I set the letters aside and opened the velvet pouch. Inside were 3 hospital bracelets and a folded slip of paper. The bracelets were tiny, the kind nurses fastened to newborn wrists. The names were not the names I gave my children. They were not the names I had written on birthday cakes and first-day photos. I traced each letter with the edge of my nail. A quiet pressure rose in my throat, then settled. I did not cry. I watched my breath move in and out, thin as the smoke from last night's candles. I closed the pouch. I did not open the slip of paper. Not yet. The mind knows how much light it can stand. The leather-bound notebook from the drawer waited on the desk. I took it to the window and sat in the chair where Edward used to read. The leather creaked like an old door. The first pages were lists, meetings, flights. Then the writing changed. It became private. It became careful. There were names that I recognized only as shadows. There were dates that mapped onto the hidden years I never dared to question. There were notes about a clinic in a town miles away, and payments made in cash, and a signature that did not belong to any doctor I have ever met. I closed the book and set it on the arm of the chair. Snow pressed its quiet face against the glass. Somewhere a plow groaned and moved past the house like a slow animal. I looked at the desk, at the empty compartment, at the key still in the lock, and I felt a small clean space open inside me. Not a wound. A room. A room where decisions could live. I took the phone from my pocket and called Amanda. She answered on the second ring, voice clear, awake even at that hour. "Romina, are you all right?" "I am awake," I said. "I would like to come by today. I have some things you should see." A pause. "Come at 11. I will clear the morning." When I hung up, the house seemed to lean closer, as if it wanted to hear what would happen next. I returned the photographs to the box, the bracelets to the pouch. I slid the key free and closed the panel. I stood for a while in the doorway and looked at the room as if I were a guest at my own life. Nothing had changed and yet everything had tilted. The desk was a desk. The rug was a rug. The air was the same air. Only the weight had moved. It had moved off my chest and onto the table where it belonged. I went upstairs to dress. I chose a black sweater and a coat that still smelled faintly of rain. In the mirror, the lines around my mouth looked more definite than they did last week. The eyes were the same. The eyes have always known more than I allowed them to say. On the way out, I stopped by the dining room and touched the back of each chair. The table still held the pattern of last night's plates, as if the porcelain had left a ghost behind. The candles were short and sad. I gathered them and threw them away. Then I opened the sideboard, removed the good crystal, and set it in a box. I did not know why I chose that task or why my hands moved with such calm. Only that something inside me liked the sound of glass nestling into tissue. It sounded like order returning in small pieces. By the time I reached Amanda's office, the snow had softened into a thin rain. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and the floor shone like a lake. Her assistant brought me in at once. Amanda stood when I entered and placed a hand over mine for a moment. Not a question, only a presence. "What do we have?" she asked. I laid the pouch and the box on her desk, then the notebook. I did not speak while she opened each in turn. I watched her face. I watched the way her eyes moved when she read something difficult. Lawyers learn how to keep the room still. Amanda allowed the room to change. It was the thing I trusted most about her. She looked up and took a slow breath. "You found these where?" "In a compartment inside the desk, with a key hidden behind a photograph." She nodded. "All right." She tapped the bracelets with the back of a pen, not touching the names. "You were right to bring them here. I have not opened the folded paper. Would you like to?" I thought about the quiet of the study, the way the key had turned, the way the snow had listened. I shook my head. "Not yet." Amanda set the paper aside. She uncapped her pen and began a list. Chain of custody. Authentication. We will scan and store. We will not move the originals more than we must. I will contact a records specialist. We will keep everything documented to the hour. I listened, and with each word she said, the room inside my chest grew a little larger. Romina, she said softly after a while, tell me what you want. I looked at the rain crawling down the window. I thought of last night, of 3 grown children who spoke to me like guardians speak to a patient who has misplaced her own keys. I thought of how easily a person can be erased with a smile, how quickly a life can be folded into a plan that is not hers. I want the truth to be louder than the story we have been living, I said. I want the law to recognize what the heart already knows. And I want to stand in my own house without feeling like a guest. Amanda did not write that down. She nodded once. Then we will begin with questions the court respects. Where were the records created? Who signed them? Why do the names not match? We will not announce anything. We will walk very quietly until it is time to walk into the light. Her words landed with the weight of a promise. She closed the box and slid it toward her side of the desk. May I keep these for the day? You may. We stood. She walked me out to the hall. At the door she touched my arm. I know that look, she said gently. It is the look of someone who finally knows where to place her anger. It does not feel like anger, I said. It feels like clarity. She smiled a little. Clarity is the better word. Outside, the rain had become a fine mist. I walked the long way to my car so I could pass the florist on the corner. In the window, a girl arranged white lilies into a shallow bowl. She was young, and her mouth was set in that serious way people have when they love what their hands are doing. I stood and watched a moment without thinking anything. Then I went back to the house. When I reached the foyer, I did not take off my coat. I went straight to the study and sat in the chair by the window again. The room waited, as if it had been holding my place. I opened the notebook to the page where the writing turned careful. I read 2 lines. Then I closed it and held it in both hands the way a person holds a warm loaf of bread. On the desk, the folded paper lay where Amanda had left it in the morning. My eyes rested on the crease. The light in the room shifted. Afternoon was moving in. The house made a soft sound as the heat came on. I told myself I would not open it. I told myself that sometimes restraint is a kindness. Then I reached out and drew it closer. My fingertip found the fold, and the paper side open like a held breath. The paper trembled between my fingers as if it had its own breath. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 lines, each written in Edward's careful script. Dates, coordinates, and at the bottom, a sentence that stole the air from the room. They were never hers. For a long while I stared at those words. The handwriting was familiar, the same measured strokes that had signed birthday cards and mortgage papers. But this time each letter felt like a blade. I folded the paper again, placed it on the desk, and pressed my palm over it until the edges bit into my skin. Outside, the daylight had thinned into a gray that belonged to no hour in particular. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the mist move across the trees. My reflection stared back, pale and composed. The reflection of a woman who had spent half her life pretending that love could fix everything it touched. In the afternoon I drove to the address from the paper. The tires cut through slush, the radio hummed softly, and the air inside the car smelled faintly of pine from the old air freshener Edward used to like. The address led to a small storage facility by the river. I parked, signed a clipboard for a disinterested clerk, and followed him down a corridor lined with steel doors. Unit 317, he said, handing me a key identical to the one from the study. It's been prepaid for years. When he left, I stood alone before the door. The air was heavy with dust and the hum of fluorescent light. I turned the key. The lock released with a tired sigh. Inside were boxes stacked neatly against the wall, each labeled with a year. 1992, 1993, 1994. I opened one. Inside were photographs, medical forms, letters from a clinic in Madrid. Names repeated across them: Lucia Alvarez, Edward Santos. Then 3 small folders, each marked with a first name I knew all too well: Leonardo, Clara, Julian. My hands went cold. I sat on the concrete floor and opened the first folder. There were birth certificates signed by Lucia, hospital records bearing Edward's signature as guardian, airfare receipts for flights that never appeared on our family calendars. The story unfolded quietly and completely. The years of adoption paperwork, the story he told of orphanage and chance, had been nothing more than a cover. He had taken them. He had brought them here and called them ours. The next folder contained a photograph of Lucia holding 3 infants. Her smile was soft, but her eyes looked away from the camera, as if already haunted. I turned the picture over. On the back, Edward had written, "For when they ask who they are." My throat closed. I pressed the photograph to my chest and for a second I could almost smell her perfume, something floral, distant, forgotten. Then the moment passed. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, closed the box and locked the unit again. When I stepped outside, evening had fallen. The river moved darkly under a crust of ice. I walked to the edge of the lot and stood there until the cold bit through my coat. I thought about Lucia, about Edward, about the 3 names that no longer belonged to me. The grief that rose inside me was not the kind that burns. It was clean, sharp, surgical. It left no room for weakness. On the drive home I rehearsed nothing. The plan was already forming, wordless and absolute. There would be no confrontation. No begging for understanding. Only precision. At home I went straight to the fireplace. I laid the folded paper on the mantel and watched the flame catch the corner. The letters curled inward, blackened, vanished. The truth did not need to burn with it. It had already settled into my bones. I took a notebook from the drawer and began to write. Dates, amounts, accounts, contacts. Every investment, every document Edward left behind. The financial map of our life. For the first time, I looked at it not as a wife keeping order, but as an architect dismantling a structure from the inside. The pen moved easily. The sound of it across the paper was steady, almost soothing. When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it beside the empty glass from my brandy. In the reflection on the glass wall, I saw my own silhouette moving through the room. The same woman my children thought they could discard. The same woman Edward once believed would never question him. But the glass does not lie. It shows everything, even the cracks that have been there all along. I touched the cold surface and whispered to my reflection, "You are done pretending." The house gave a soft creak in reply. Somewhere beneath my feet, the heating system hummed alive. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint orange glow from the dying fire. Tomorrow I would start the next step. Quietly, thoroughly. The truth was a weapon now, and I would learn exactly how to use it. I woke before the light, not because of fear, but because a decision once made refuses to let you sleep. The snow had hardened in the night. When I opened the window, a crack, the air came in clean and sharp. I let it bite my lungs. It made me feel present in my own body again. There was work to do. Quiet work. Careful work. I brewed coffee and carried it to the study. I did not turn on the chandelier. I wanted the room to keep its twilight honesty. The desk waited with the patience of old wood. I slid my fingers to the panel I had found and opened it without hesitation. The key fit as if it had been made for my hand. Inside the compartment the felt looked undisturbed, but I knew better now. Secrets never rest. I removed the velvet pouch, the flat box, and the leather notebook. I laid them in a row and placed a sheet of parchment beside them. Today would not be a day for wandering thoughts. Today would be a day of inventory and proof. I began with the photographs. Lucia by the sea, Lucia in a hospital room with sunlight pooling over white sheets, Lucia holding a child whose face I could almost name if I let myself. In every picture she carried a softness that made my throat ache. Love makes people luminous. It also makes them vulnerable. I traced the edges of the prints with care and slipped each into a plastic sleeve. The movement calmed me. Next came the letters. Some were in English. Some were in Spanish so simple a child could translate them. There were instructions about travel. There were notes about fees that should not be recorded. There were assurances written by men who preferred shadows to laws. In the margins I saw Edward's tidy numerals, measuring risk the way he once measured interest and tax. I wrote a list as I read. Sender. Recipient. Date. Summary line. Every entry felt like a stone laid into a path that had always existed, but had been buried under snow. I kept my handwriting plain. No flourishes. No sentiment. The facts would have their own voice. After the letters I returned to the velvet pouch and removed the hospital bracelets. I matched each tiny band to the corresponding certificate from the storage unit copies. I did not allow myself to think of first cries or the shape of small hands. I noted ward numbers, physician signatures, and the way the ink had aged. One document held a smudge where a thumb had pressed too hard. I lifted it to the light and saw the faint whorls like a ghostly map. Whoever had touched it had done so in haste. When I reached for the leather notebook, a tremor passed through me. I stilled it by placing my palm flat on the cover. The leather warmed under my skin. I opened to the careful pages and read the entries I had only skimmed before. A clinic near Salamanca. An accountant in New Haven who did not ask questions as long as forms arrived before the quarter closed. A notary who preferred cash and spoke rarely. A line that said simply, "We will bring them home before the autumn storms." Them. Not us. Them. I stopped reading and stared at that sentence until it lost its shape. Then I set a tab on the page and closed the book. The mind can swallow only so much truth at once and still remain a tool. By mid-morning the desk had become an ordered field. Evidence here. Index there. Photographs sealed. Letters catalogued. I took a single step back and looked at the whole of it. It was not my grief laid out. It was not my anger either. It was the architecture of a lie that had stood for decades, finally exposed to air. The phone vibrated on the arm of the chair. A message from Amanda. "I have a records specialist ready. Bring only what you must and keep a second set hidden. We will scan to a secure repository while you wait." I replied with one word. Understood. Before I packed anything, I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It held stationery I had never used, heavy cream with a crest I always thought too formal for ordinary life. I took one sheet and began a letter. Not to my children. Not yet. To myself. "You are allowed to know," I wrote. "You are allowed to act as the person who knows." I folded the page and slid it beneath the felt of the hidden compartment. A promise anchored where the deceit once lived. The next task was practical. I walked the house with a legal pad and wrote down every item my children might claim if they believed I would not notice. The bronze clock in the hall. The silver in the dining room that had belonged to my grandmother. The paintings collected in the early years when we traveled and still spoke to one another like equals. I photographed each and emailed the set to a cloud account only I used. I sent a duplicate to Amanda with no subject line and no message. Then I deleted the sent copy and emptied the trash. Precision is not cruelty. It is protection. Around noon the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. A courier in a navy coat. I opened the door and he handed me a small parcel that required a signature. Inside was a digital recorder and a simple note from the investigator I had contacted last week. "We cannot change what happened. We can document what is." I smiled despite myself. The right allies do not waste words. I placed fresh batteries in the recorder and set it on the mantel. Tonight when the house was still I would speak the facts into it. Dates. Findings. Observations. The record would exist whether anyone chose to believe me or not. The afternoon was a series of small movements. I called the bank and asked to move a modest portion of funds into a separate account in my own name. The representative used a soothing tone and asked if I wanted to add my children as beneficiaries. I said no and let the word sit long enough that he stopped asking anything else. I called the security company and updated the access codes. I changed the passwords on my email and on the safe I had always pretended mattered. I made tea and left it to grow cold. I felt no hunger. The body had stepped aside to let the mind carry the day. At 3 I returned to the study, locked the materials I would not carry into a fireproof case, and packed the rest into a simple canvas tote. I turned once in the doorway and took in the room. I had always thought of this space as his. Today it had become mine. On the drive to Amanda's office the sky brightened. A break in the winter cover that let a single bar of light fall across the road. It felt undeserved and exactly right at the same time. I parked, lifted the tote from the seat, and walked inside with the calm of someone who has already crossed the point of no return. Amanda met me in the hall and led me to a conference room where a scanner waited like a quiet animal. Her records specialist wore soft gloves and said very little. We began. Sheet by sheet the lie surrendered itself to light. Each page flashed once on the screen and then appeared on the monitor with a clarity that made my skin prickle. Names. Numbers. Signatures I could pick out of 1,000. I initialed every scan. We compared every page. We built a mirror of the hidden world that could not be misplaced or misread. When we finished, Amanda locked the digital files behind layers of credentials and handed me 2 encrypted drives. One for the house. One for a place that is not the house, she said. I nodded. I already knew where the second would go. Only then did she lean back and study me. Her gaze was not clinical. It was human. You are steady, she said. I am finished pretending, I answered. She folded her hands. The next steps are predictable. We preserve. We establish provenance. We test samples where testing is possible. We request certified copies from institutions that will not want to cooperate. And we do not announce anything to anyone. I understood what she was reminding me. Do not give the story away before the story is ready to do the work. On the way home, dusk began its slow climb up the trees. I did not turn on the radio. I let the quiet sit with me like a passenger who respects boundaries. When I reached the drive, the house looked smaller than it had the day before. Perhaps that is what happens when secrets leave. The walls relax. Inside, I place one drive in the small safe under the stairs and slip the other into the lining of a coat I almost never wear. I set the recorder on the desk and pressed the red button. My voice sounded unfamiliar at first, then softened into itself. My name is Romina Santos. Today I opened a compartment in a desk that has stood in my house for years. Inside I found photographs, bracelets, letters, and a book. These are the facts as they exist, not as they were told. The man I married built a story that required me to be blind. I am no longer blind. I spoke for a long time. When I stopped, the house had turned dark. I did not turn on the lights. Through the window, the snow reflected the faint glow of the street. I felt the quiet change shape. It no longer felt like waiting. It felt like a held breath before a name is spoken. I went to the mantel and looked at the place where the paper had burned. A tiny crescent of ash clung to the stone. I brushed it away with 2 fingers and watched it scatter. In the glass I could see my outline. It looked like a woman ready to walk into a room where she had always belonged. Tomorrow I would learn which door the key opened next. Tomorrow the truth would stop being private. Tonight I let the silence sit beside me like an old friend. The next morning arrived heavy and gray. The kind of sky that flattens everything it touches. I moved through the house as though following invisible marks on the floor, each step deliberate. There were no more questions left about what Edward had done. What remained was the question of what I would do with what I now knew. The coffee machine hissed and stilled. The clock above the sink ticked in a rhythm too loud for the quiet kitchen. I sat with my notebook open and drew a single line across the page. A boundary. On one side, the life I had been living. On the other, the one I was about to build. At 9 the phone rang. Amanda's voice was calm. The forensic lab confirmed the document's authenticity. Nothing forged. The clinic existed, the accountant existed. Everything matches your husband's handwriting. Thank you, I said. There's one more thing, she added. The clinic's records show a 4th name. It was crossed out. We'll need to look into that. A 4th name. I wrote it down without asking what it meant. The sound of the pen moving across the paper steadied me. After the call, I went to Edward's wardrobe. It still smelled faintly of cedar and a cologne I had once loved. I searched the inner seams, the jacket linings, the pockets he never used. In one coat I found a receipt folded to the size of a postage stamp. It was for a safe deposit box at a downtown bank, dated 2 weeks before his death. The box number was faint but legible. By noon I was standing in front of the same bank, the air outside smelling of exhaust and wet pavement. The clerk asked for identification, then disappeared into the vault and returned with a small steel drawer. Inside were 2 envelopes. One bore my name in Edward's hand, the other was unmarked. I opened the one with my name first. It held a single page. If you are reading this, then you have already opened what was never meant for you. Forgive me or don't, but know that I tried to fix it before the end. There was no signature, only the indentation of his pen pressing through the paper. The second envelope contained a USB drive. I slipped it into my pocket and left the bank without another word. At home, I plugged the drive into the old desktop computer in the study. Folders appeared, photos, scanned letters, legal files. One video file sat at the top, titled Madrid 1994. I hesitated, then opened it. The footage was grainy, filmed on an old handheld camera. A woman, Lucia, sat on a hospital bed, pale but smiling. Edward stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. The camera wobbled as someone laughed. A nurse entered the frame holding a small bundle. 3 babies. My breath caught. Edward leaned closer to the nurse, whispered something, and she nodded. He looked directly into the lens then, and for a moment it felt like he was staring through time straight at me. The video ended abruptly. I sat back numb. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer. I closed the laptop, removed the drive, and dropped it into a glass of water. It hissed once, then went silent. I didn't need any more proof. Evening came quickly. The house darkened until only the faint reflections of the fire lit the glass walls. I poured wine but didn't drink it. My hands rested flat on the table where my children had sat days ago, planning my disappearance. I could see their faces in memory, confident, pitying, certain they had already won. I whispered their names one by one, tasting the weight of each. Leonardo, Clara, Julian. Then I whispered a 4th name, the one Amanda had mentioned from the file. It felt strange, unfinished, like the opening of a door I hadn't yet decided to walk through. Before bed I returned to the recorder on the desk and pressed the button again. "This is the continuation," I said softly. "The documents are real. The story is older than me. The truth does not need to be shared yet, but it will be. For now I am the only one who knows. And that is power enough." I paused, listening to my own breathing. They think I am fragile. They will come again soon, maybe tomorrow, to convince me. But they will not see what is already moving beneath the glass. I clicked the recorder off. The room held its breath, then released it. When I climbed the stairs to bed, the snow outside had turned to freezing rain. Each drop struck the window with a small sound like a clock marking the seconds of a countdown I had already started. I began with the quiet things. Quiet things travel far. They slip through rooms without drawing attention, and when they arrive, everyone assumes they were always there. At dawn I called the bank again and shifted more weight out of the accounts my children liked to visit. I did not empty anything. I adjusted currents. The representative tried his gentle script again about trusted relatives. I told him I wished to be the only person I trusted this week. He laughed because he thought it was a joke. I let him keep the laugh. I called the insurance broker and reviewed every policy, every rider, every beneficiary. I corrected spellings. I removed middle names where they had been added without my consent. I added a contingent clause for a charity whose mission statement mentions dignity twice. The broker said I was very organized. I told him that organization is a form of prayer. By mid-morning the investigator arrived. Her name was Margaret, and she carried herself with the clean posture of someone who has spent years listening for lies. She placed a flat case on my dining table and slid out 3 folders, each labeled with a single initial. "Preliminary," she said. "Enough to show intent, not yet enough to indict." "Show me," I said. The first folder held photographs of Leonardo entering a private gaming room through a service door. There were ledgers, loan slips, transfers moving like a school of fish between accounts that should not be touching. Margaret tapped a column with her nail. "He borrows to cover the last loss and then steals to cover the last loan. Spirals. He believes timing will save him. Timing never saves anyone." The second folder contained a ledger that Clara had kept in a notebook with a floral cover. She had always loved pretty covers. The columns looked like budgeting at first glance, but the totals marched neatly away from a foundation fund and into expenses that wore the names of Air and Silk and Weekend in Miami. There were accompanying messages to a trainer whose sentences were full of future tense, as if happiness were only one reservation away. The third folder felt colder in my hands. Julian outside late places with later people. Short meetings that ended with longer nights. Cash counted in rooms with rich wallpaper and poor ventilation. A receipt for a rental car returned with the kind of smile employees are trained not to question. Margaret waited while I looked. She did not narrate beyond what the pages already knew how to say. "How far will this go?" I asked. "As far as you wish it to go," she said. "The truth is a ladder and a lever. Decide whether you want to climb or move the ground." I closed the folders and drew them closer to my side of the table. "We will move the ground. But not yet." She nodded and slid across a small device about the size of a book. A secure recorder. If they speak to you about plans, set it on the table and smile. You do not have to say much. Let the room do the work. After she left, the house felt taller. The chandelier seemed farther from the ground. I took the recorder into the study and set it beside the pen, beside the notebook that now carried my map of exits. Then I called my accountant. He started with pleasantries. I let him finish them. I asked for an audit of every transfer I had approved in the last 5 years. I asked for the dates my children had called him. I asked for a list of times when he had said yes to them without speaking to me. He cleared his throat and said that would take time. I said time was the one thing that is always given to those who ask plainly. At noon, Leonardo texted. A simple line that wore kindness like a winter coat. Checking in. How are you feeling after the other night? I typed an answer and deleted it. I typed another and deleted that one too. I wrote I feel lighter. Thank you for caring. Then I set the phone face down and waited for the next small move. It came minutes later. He asked if he could stop by with a folder his firm had prepared to help me consider long-term options. I said that would be lovely. I put the recorder on the table and placed a plate of cookies beside it, as if the memory of childhood could distract the present from noticing the red light. Clara called just after 2. Her voice was bright and breathless, the way she sounds when she has already made the decision she is pretending to ask about. Mom, listen, I have a client dinner tonight and my sitter fell through. Can the kids stay with you? It would help so much. You may bring them at 6, I said. They will be asleep by 9. Bring their favorite books. Silence, brief and sharp. She had expected negotiation. You are an angel, she said. I owe you. You owe me, I thought, and let the sentence float away without catching it. Julian sent a photo instead of a message. A glass on a terrace. A view of gray water pretending to be silver. The caption read, "Wish you were here." I replied with a single heart and no words. People do not study single hearts. They hurry past them. In the late afternoon, the doorbell rang. Leonardo stood in the foyer with a leather folio and an expression he had practiced in the mirror. Concern with the lacquer of authority. I brought him to the dining room and gestured to the chair where the recorder waited like a polite guest. He opened the folio and began a gentle presentation about transitions, about easing burdens, about the luxury of smaller spaces. He had handouts. He had bullet points. He had a subtle condescension that would have charmed a stranger. I poured tea and placed the cup near the edge of the recorder. When he paused, I asked only one question. Who suggested this plan first? You or your sister? He smiled at that. We are aligned, he said. Aligned is not the same as honest, I said. The smile thinned. He leaned in. Mom, you cannot keep living like this. You are vulnerable in a house this size. If something happened, we would feel responsible. Responsible. The word slid across the table and tried to pick up the silverware. I let it. And the assets, I asked. Who will feel responsible for those? He did not flinch. I will manage them. We can place a temporary guardianship over your financials to protect you from bad actors. From whom? I asked softly. From you. He held my gaze for a long time and then did something he rarely does. He looked away first. I thanked him for his care. I asked him to leave the folio so I could study it. When he rose to go, he touched my shoulder the way a son touches a mother who is standing at the edge of a cliff he intends to describe as a meadow. I walked him to the door and watched him cross the snow. His footprint filled with water as soon as he lifted his heel. Night gathered early. At 6, the children came with their backpacks and their unbroken trust. They ran to the piano and asked for songs. I played the opening notes of something simple and sang under my breath. Later I read to them until their eyes closed. When I carried them to the guest room, their heads settled against my shoulder with a weight that felt like a vow I had once made without signing anything. I stayed beside their beds longer than I needed to. When the house was quiet again, I took out 3 thick envelopes and laid them side by side. Not yet gold. Not yet sealed. For now, plain paper would do. I wrote names on each in a hand they would recognize. Then I opened the drawers and began to sort the copies. The facts, the dates, the photographs, the small precise lines the law respects. Before I slept, I stood in the doorway and looked back at the table, at the envelopes arranged like 3 small doors waiting for morning. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. The plan was not dramatic. It was patient. I turned off the last lamp and the house exhaled. Morning brought a thin blue light and a sky so clear it felt like clean glass. I dressed in quiet clothes and tied my hair back the way I do when I want my face to tell the truth before my mouth does. The children woke laughing and spilled into the kitchen, soft with sleep and milk. I made pancakes and listened to them describe their dreams in pieces that did not fit together. The world belongs to people who can live with pieces that do not fit. I kissed their foreheads and sent them out the door when Clara arrived with thanks that bounced but did not land. After they left, I carried the envelopes to the study and began refining the contents. Leonardo's packet grew heavier with the pattern of his debts. I put in the dates of withdrawals from client accounts, the transfers into shells with names that sounded like summer streets, the late-night entrances captured by cameras that believed no one was watching them. Clara's packet held the trail from the foundation to the boutique, from the boutique to a hotel under a different name, from that hotel back to a house where a polite man watered the plants while her husband worked late. Julian's packet did not need weight. It needed sharpness. Receipts. Photos. A list of names that surfaced in more than one investigation. I added one page in my own handwriting that said simply, I know. I called Margaret. I would like recordings, I said. Not mine. Theirs. She understood at once. Public places. Let them do the talking. By noon she had sent me 3 locations and 3 tables where a small device would live better than a centerpiece. She sent a 4th location as well with a note that read, if you need truth fast. I smiled at the screen and felt a small curve lift the corner of my mouth that had not moved like that for weeks. In the afternoon Clara returned, alone this time, without the mask of motion. She stood in the foyer with a careful smile and a bag of pastries. For you, she said. A peace offering. I took the bag and set it aside. We are not at war, I said. We are at definition. She blinked. She tried a laugh. You sound like a seminar. I sound like a person who knows the difference between care and control. She asked to sit, and I brought her to the sunroom where the light forgives more than other rooms do. I placed the recorder beneath a magazine and poured tea. We spoke about the children. We spoke about her work. We did not speak about the nights listed in Margaret's notes until she was the one who reached for the line. Mom, she said too quickly. If I told you I made a few mistakes, would you still help me? I have always helped you, I said. I paid for rooms and dresses in schools and the days you did not want to see in the calendar. I am still helping you. I am defining the edge where help ends. She looked at me the way a person looks at a window that has turned into a mirror. Then she tried a new angle. Leo says you are being influenced. He says someone is turning you against us. He is right, I said. The person is called the truth. Her eyes flashed, then softened. She leaned back. You used to be softer. I used to be blind. When she left, she hugged me too long. The way a diver takes an extra breath before disappearing underwater. I let her hold on. Then I let go first. Julian appeared at dusk. Without warning and without coat despite the cold. He smelled of peppermint and expensive cologne poured too quickly. He wandered the living room touching the frames, the books, the edge of the piano. He always needed to touch what he planned to take. I offered him coffee. He asked for wine. I gave him tea. Mom, he said, settling into the couch as if it were a throne. We need to talk like we used to. No lawyers. No plans. Just us. Just us, I repeated, and set the recorder between us like a harmless bowl. He spoke in circles. He spoke in charm. He spoke until the charm ran out. Then he dropped his voice and asked me to co-sign a line of credit small enough to sound like love and large enough to feel like surrender. I asked him to explain the business it would serve. He told a story and the story had holes you could drive a truck through. I nodded as if trucks were meant to pass through family rooms. Sweetheart, I said at last, what happens when the tide goes out? He looked at me confused. What tide? The one you have been surfing, I said. I want the sentence you say to yourself when the music stops. He did not answer. He looked at his hands and smiled a little, as if there were a camera nearby. He put the smile away when he saw there was not. When he left, the house felt cleaner. I opened the windows for a minute, and let the air remind the furniture what winter means. In the late evening, Amanda called. We have secured the repository, she said. Multiple backups and witnesses. The materials are now larger than any one person's courage. Good, I said. I will need something else. What? A notary I can trust. A courier who does not read. A printer that never jams. She laughed. I can give you all three. I printed the first set of letters and placed them in a drawer. Not the final pages. Not yet. I wanted the ink to rest. I wanted the paper to learn the weight of the words. Before midnight I went out to the porch and stood under the clear sky. The snow had hardened into a crust that held my weight for 3 steps, and then surrendered quietly on the 4th. The stars looked close enough to taste. The town was silent. The house behind me glowed like a lantern. I whispered the line I wanted the night to carry to the next day. I did not plan the words. They stepped forward on their own. Christmas is always the time for revelations. The days that followed carried the quiet rhythm of something building underneath calm. I filled the house with small, deliberate sounds. The scrape of paper, the hum of the printer, the soft click of keys as I typed a list of guests who would soon believe they were attending a reconciliation dinner. Outside, winter had sharpened. The sky stayed the color of pewter and the lake behind the property had turned into a mirror that did not like to be looked at too long. Amanda called to confirm the delivery of the certified copies. Margaret texted the code word ready. Every piece of the architecture I had drawn in pencil now existed in the world, physical, traceable, unstoppable. I called my children. I kept my voice warm. Christmas dinner, I told them. All of us together. It has been too long. Clara hesitated first. I could hear her thinking through whatever stories she had rehearsed to avoid me. Of course, she said finally. I'll bring dessert. Leonardo accepted as though he were granting forgiveness. Julian sounded relieved, as if he believed in second chances more than consequences. After the calls I sat at the table and looked at the 3 envelopes waiting under a crystal bowl. I had replaced the plain paper with heavy cream stock, embossed initials on each flap, and sealed them with gold wax. A small flourish for the ending of a long performance. That evening I visited the florist and ordered lilies, red roses, and small sprigs of pine. I asked them to deliver everything on the morning of the 24th. The clerk asked the occasion. A family gathering, I said, and smiled in a way that made her stop asking questions. Back home I went through the house room by room. Each space needed to say something. The dining room would hold beauty. The study would hold truth. I polished the silver until my reflection blurred into it. I changed the candles to white and rearranged the chairs so that none of them sat where they had before. People behave differently when their angles of view are new. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the wind. The house spoke in its old language. The creak of beams, the sigh of pipes, the gentle tick of the clock that once woke the children for school. Somewhere between wake and dream I saw Edward standing in the doorway, the same faint smile he wore in old photographs. I didn't speak. Neither did he. He turned away, and I understood that ghosts do not linger where their secrets have already been told. At dawn I rose and began the cooking. The knife moved easily through the vegetables. The sound of oil meeting the pan was clean like applause. I measured time by scent. The sweetness of onions, the tang of wine reducing, the smoke of roasting lamb. By noon the table gleamed. I placed the 3 envelopes on each plate. I filled the crystal glasses with water first, not wine. Clear before red. Always clarity before celebration. When the doorbell rang, I felt the brief flutter that comes before a performance. I smoothed my sleeves and opened the door. Leonardo entered first, carrying an expensive bottle of champagne. He kissed my cheek and scanned the room as if counting exits. Clara followed with her children, who ran straight to the fireplace. Julian came last, late as always, his charm wrapped tight around the unease in his eyes. Everything looks wonderful, Clara said. It does, I replied. Tonight we eat as family. I watched them settle, exchanging glances over folded napkins, each one wondering what game I was playing. I smiled. The table shone beneath the chandelier, each crystal drop holding a reflection of something about to break. Dinner began with careful laughter. They told stories from old holidays, pieces of nostalgia held up like trophies. I listened, nodding, and occasionally added a detail they had forgotten. The recorder on the mantel blinked softly, catching every sound. Halfway through the meal, when the plates were half empty and the wine had done its soft work, Leonardo spoke. "Mom, about the other day," he began. "We just want to make sure you're happy. We might have come across wrong." I placed my fork down. "You care about my happiness?" "Of course," Clara said quickly. "We love you." Julian raised his glass. "To Mom. Still the heart of this family." The irony tasted like sugar on my tongue. "To family," I said again. "May it always be honest." The clinking of glass echoed through the room like a bell marking the hour. I watched the reflections ripple along the table, each one smaller than the last. They did not see the difference in my smile. They did not see that behind the plates lay everything I had prepared. I leaned back in my chair. "There's something I'd like to give you," I said softly. "A gift. For each of you." Their eyes brightened, greedy and hopeful. I slid the envelopes toward them. "Open them after dessert," I said. "It will mean more that way." They laughed, relieved. Gifts meant reconciliation. Gifts meant victory. They didn't understand that sometimes a gift is simply the truth wrapped beautifully enough that people accept it before they realize it will ruin them. Dessert was coffee and Clara's perfect cake. Layers of cream and sugar that felt like apology made edible. I ate one bite, then pushed my plate aside. The fire snapped behind us. The clock struck 9. "Now," I said. "Open them." For a heartbeat, the only sound was paper tearing. Then the air changed. Leonardo's face went first. Confidence melting into confusion, then disbelief. Clara's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Julian blinked, laughed once, and then stopped when he saw my expression. "What is this?" Leonardo said. "The truth," I replied. Inside each envelope lay the documents they had never imagined existed. Bank transfers, hotel receipts, transcripts, photographs, signatures. And at the very top, a single page of genetic tests that told them something even deeper. They were not mine. Clara's voice cracked. This can't be real." "It is," I said. "Your father made sure of that." Leonardo stood, papers trembling in his hands. "You're lying." "You know I don't lie," I said calmly. "I believed what I was told, just as you did. The difference is that I searched for proof." Julian sank back into his chair. "So we're what, strangers?" "You are not strangers," I said. "You are victims of a man who thought love could be forged like a document. But you became architects of your own cruelty when you chose to turn against the only person who still called you family." Clara shook her head, tears streaking her makeup. "Why would you do this to us?" "To give you a chance to see yourselves," I said. "Before the world does." Leonardo threw the envelope across the table. Pages scattered like white birds startled into flight. "You think this gives you power? You think this will make you free?" I stood slowly. "It already has." He lunged forward, but Julian caught his arm. The chandelier above trembled. Clara sobbed into her hands. The children upstairs stirred, their small voices calling faintly for their mother. I walked to the fireplace, picked up the recorder and pressed stop. "Everything has been documented," I said. "The authorities will receive copies in the morning. The foundations, the firms, the banks, they'll know where the money came from." Julian stared at me, pale. "You wouldn't." I met his eyes. "I already did." The room went still. The only sound left was the crackle of fire. I took my coat from the back of the chair and looked at them one last time. "You wanted me gone," I said. "Consider your wish granted." As I stepped outside, the cold met me like an old friend. Snow fell in soft, endless silence. Behind me, the house glowed warm and golden. A cathedral of glass holding the end of one story and the beginning of another. I didn't look back. Some reflections are better left broken. The cold met me like a blessing. It cleared the last of the candle smoke from my lungs and put a clean edge on the night. Snow drifted down in slow, attentive flakes, the kind that seem to choose where they land. I pulled the door closed behind me and stood on the stone step for a breath that belonged only to me. From inside came a sudden scrape of chairs. Voices rose, then tangled. Someone said my name like a question. Someone else said it like a curse. I walked down the path without hurry. The world felt exact, as if a lens had finally snapped into focus. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. "Amanda." I answered and kept my voice low. "It is done," I said. "Then we begin," she replied. I have filed the notice for an immediate preservation order. The banks will freeze any accounts tied to the foundation and to the client funds listed in your son's filings. Our courier is en route to the district office with the recording and the certified copies. You are not alone in this house anymore. The paper trail is awake. Thank you. Go to the hotel like we planned, she said. Use the back entrance. Your room is ready under the travel name. I will call when the confirmations arrive. I ended the call and walked through the gate to the street where the snow turned to slush under the tires that had already passed. A driver waited at the corner with the inside light on and his hands at 10 and 2. The way careful people sit when they want to do a good job. I got in and gave him the name on the reservation. He did not look at me more than once. As we pulled away, the house glowed behind the trees like a memory that did not know it had become a memory. I let it shrink in the rear window until the road curved and it was gone. Traffic was thin. The city had wrapped itself in winter and early lights. A choir was singing on the radio in a language I did not speak and did not need to. I watched the driver's eyes in the mirror and saw nothing but the road. I closed mine and let the hum of the engine carry me forward. At the hotel, I went straight to the side entrance through the service drive. The lobby smelled of pine and clean linen. No one turned their head. The clerk slid a key card across the counter and called me by the name on the reservation without a pause. In the room the curtains were already drawn, the bed smoothed into an invitation. I set my coat on the chair and stood by the window, not to look out, but to feel the quiet that lives on the far side of glass. The first message arrived almost at once. Leonardo. It was a single word written with a steadiness he did not feel. Why? I did not answer. The second message arrived before the first could cool. Come back. We can fix this. I put the phone down on the desk and poured water from the carafe. The glass clicked lightly when it met the wood. A simple sound, clean and final. Amanda called again. The preservation order is active, she said. I have confirmation from the bank and from the clerk. Your son will discover that his transfers meet a new wall. Your daughter's access to the foundation account is now view only. The investigator has filed her affidavits under seal. The video is logged. We have a timestamp for the recorder and for the envelopes. Everything aligns. Good, I said. Media will not be our first move, she continued. But media will move anyway. Once the institutions react, there will be leaks. Keep your phone on silent. Do not answer calls you do not want to answer. We will choose when to speak. Understood. After the call, I sat on the edge of the bed and laced my fingers together to stop the small tremor that wanted to return. I let it pass and then I uncrossed my hands. The body carries old habits long after the mind is done with them. I forgave it and stood. I showered the way you do when you have crossed a threshold. Not to wash away the night, but to meet the person on the far side of it. The water ran hot for a long time. When the mirror fogged, my face disappeared and then slowly came back as if I were being developed in a darkroom that belonged to me. I put on the robe and opened the minibar not for a drink, but for the small square of chocolate I found inside. I broke it in half and tasted the clean bitterness of it. Then the phone vibrated again. Clara. The messages came in a small frantic river. You ruined us. How could you? Please answer. Please tell me this is not what it looks like. I am outside your room. Where are you? Mom, please. I imagined her in the driveway, the porch light finding the shine in her eyes, the chandelier behind her still trembling from the last slammed chair. I pictured the children asleep upstairs, dreamless for once, protected by the fact that neither truth nor lies ever bother to climb a staircase when there is no audience to watch them. Julian called. I let it ring. He sent a voice message instead. His tone was soft at first, then sharp, then soft again. He said he could fix it. He said he could make it all disappear. He said he did not know what I thought I knew. The message ended in a dry sound that could have been a laugh or a sob. I did not play it twice. I called Margaret and asked for a simple check. Put eyes on the house for 1 hour, I said. I want to know who leaves, who arrives, and whether any lights turn on in the study. She did not ask why. I already have someone on the block, she said. You will have a note by the hour. I turned on the television without sound. A news ticker scrolled across a channel that never sleeps. Markets quiet ahead of holiday. City salutes volunteer crews clearing snow. Then a line that made the air between the screen and my face feel thin. State regulator opens inquiry into irregularities at Santos Foundation. Sources confirm a preliminary review. The anchor's mouth moved. A photo of the foundation building appeared in the corner. A second line followed. Law firm faces questions after client funds flagged for audit. I did not smile. I did not cry. I breathed and set the remote down. The hotel phone rang. The desk manager asked if I would accept a guest who had arrived without a reservation. I said no. The manager said the guest insisted he was my son. I said the manager should follow the policy that keeps all guests safe. Minutes later, a new message arrived from Leonardo. You think this is a game? There are people who will not care about your documents. Do you understand? Answer me or do not be surprised when others start answering for you. I took a photo of the message and forwarded it to Amanda and Margaret. Then I turned the phone face down again. I would not follow threats into the dark. I had brought everything into the light. That is where it would stay. The hour passed and with it came Margaret's quiet update. Your daughter left with the children. Your oldest paced and then made several calls on the back terrace where he thought he could not be seen. He spoke to someone who arrived in a black car and handed over a small paper bag. Your youngest drove away alone toward the river and came back 15 minutes later with nothing in his hands. The study light stayed off. The dining room glowed. No one cleaned the table. I thanked her and asked for one more watch through the night. Then I stood at the window and lifted the curtain an inch. Across the street, a figure in a knit hat walked, a dog that did not want to leave the patch of grass it had claimed. The snow had stopped. The streetlight drew a soft ring on the pavement. I sat at the desk and opened the notebook I had brought with me. I wrote the date and the time and the words that explained nothing and everything. The glass broke. What remains is honest. A knock sounded at the door. I moved quietly and looked through the peephole. A hotel porter held a white envelope and a tray with a teapot. He lifted the envelope toward the door so I could read the card. Courtesy of the house. Seasonal tea. I opened the door and thanked him. On the tray lay a small sprig of pine beside the pot and a folded napkin that smelled faintly of oranges. I poured a cup and brought it to the window. On the television, the anchor's expression had shifted to that careful look they practice for early stories. The ticker now included a line about a court filing under seal and a date for a preliminary hearing after the holiday. The words were careful. The words did not say my name. They did not need to. I raised the cup and held it just under my mouth, letting the steam warm my face. I thought of the last moment at the table when the envelopes opened and the air changed its shape. It was not the rage I remembered. It was the silence that followed. A silence that respected the truth even as it tried to refuse it. The phone vibrated once more on the desk. A new message from a number I did not know. It contained a single sentence. We need to talk about the fourth name. I stared at it until the words and the space between them began to switch places. Then I set the phone down and closed my eyes for a moment. The story had changed its clothes, but it was not finished dressing. There was always another door. There was always another key. I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I looked like a woman who had allowed a building to fall because it had been built on a fault line. Behind the reflection, the city blinked and breathed. When I finally lay down, the bed held me like water that knows how to carry a body without drowning it. I left one lamp on, the small one by the desk, as if I were guiding someone home. Perhaps that someone was me. Sleep came in pieces, not in waves. I dreamed of a house made entirely of windows with no doors at all. I dreamed of Lucia on a balcony with the ocean behind her, the wind catching the edge of her dress. I dreamed of a fourth cradle and a hand reaching in to lift a child I could not see. I woke before dawn with the taste of salt in my mouth, as if the ocean had followed me to the 5th floor. The phone blinked once in the dark. Another message from Amanda. Be ready at 8. The hearing will move fast. Dress like you forgave yourself. I turned off the lamp and let the room go quiet. In the silence, I heard the world adjusting to its new shape. Somewhere a bell chimed the hour. Somewhere a door opened. Somewhere very close, the day sharpened into its first clean line. Morning came too fast, slicing through the blackout curtains like a blade through paper. The world outside was white again. Snow fallen, silence absolute. I dressed in gray, the color of neutrality, and pinned my hair the way my mother once did when she wanted people to listen before they judged. Amanda's words echoed in my mind. Dress like you forgave yourself. I had tried to. Forgiveness, I learned, was not a softness. It was armor worn quietly. The car waited downstairs. The driver nodded without asking my name. We passed through streets wrapped in winter's hush. On corners, newspapers lay bundled, headlines still hidden under their plastic covers. I wondered if any would bear our story by afternoon. The courthouse stood like an old cathedral to reason. Columns tall. Doors heavy enough to remind you that truth has weight. Inside, Amanda met me with her usual composure. She wore black gloves, a small notebook tucked under her arm. The judge has reviewed the emergency filings, she said. They're calling it an accelerated inquiry into fiduciary misconduct. It's not public yet, but it will be. By tomorrow, every outlet will have it. And the names. They'll redact the children's for now, she said. But Edward's is already there. His reputation, his foundation, both will bear the first strike. You, however, remain the petitioner. The survivor. That's how the record will begin. Survivor. The word sat oddly on my tongue. It sounded too clean for the chaos that had lived in me. When we entered the chamber, the air was cold, sharp with the scent of paper and authority. Across the room, Leonardo sat with his lawyer, a man whose tie matched the anger in his eyes. Clara sat farther back, pale, clutching a tissue as if it were a lifeline. Julian was nowhere to be seen. The judge, an older woman with kind but unyielding eyes, began the proceedings without ceremony. Amanda presented the documentation with the precision of someone cutting glass. Financial trails, recordings, notarized confirmations, genetic results. The words fraudulent acquisition, unauthorized fund transfer, identity misrepresentation moved through the room like the sound of slow thunder. Leonardo's lawyer objected twice, each time quieter than before. Clara tried to speak once, but the judge raised a hand. This is not a conversation, she said gently. This is an illumination. When it was over, the judge turned to me. Mrs. Santos, she said, what is it that you seek from this petition? I rose. My voice came easily, though my pulse climbed. I seek acknowledgement that the truth exists, I said. That it belongs not to whoever hides it best, but to whoever can stand to live with it. The judge regarded me for a long time, then nodded. That, she said, is the purest form of justice. Outside, the air bit at my skin, but I welcomed it. Amanda walked beside me, her silence full of approval. Reporters were already gathering by the steps, their microphones like small spears of light. I did not stop. I did not need to. The story would tell itself now. By the time I reached the car, the first headline had already appeared on someone's phone. Santos Foundation under investigation. Family empire built on stolen identities. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face beside the words. Calm. Almost serene. The woman who had spent half her life living in someone else's story was finally watching the narrative return to her hands. Amanda's voice broke the silence. There's more, she said. Margaret traced the fourth name from the clinic. It belongs to someone still alive. A woman named Eva Morales. She was registered as a nurse at the facility that handled the adoptions. The note says she vanished shortly after the records ended. Vanished, I repeated. She reappeared 2 years ago in a rural registry near Cadiz, under a new identity. The name hung in the air, strange and familiar all at once. Amanda looked at me carefully. You should know this before it reaches the court. Eva Morales is Lucia's sister. My breath caught. And the child? Amanda hesitated. She had a daughter, born months after the others. The records were sealed. I believe she might be the fourth name. The car slowed at a light. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that the ground beneath its quiet mourning had just shifted again. I closed my eyes. Find her, I said. Before they do. Amanda nodded. We'll begin immediately. When the car pulled up to the hotel, the reporters were already waiting, voices rising in waves. I slipped through a side door, following the hall's polished silence back to my room. On the desk lay the recorder and a note from the concierge. You left this in the dining room. I smiled faintly. The red light was still blinking, still recording. I pressed play. The voices from the supper filled the room again. Anger, disbelief, the breaking of plates. But underneath it all there was something else. Faint. A whisper. A voice I didn't recognize. A woman's voice. Calm, steady, Spanish accent soft against the noise. "She doesn't know about the 4th, it said. Then the recording cut off. I stood motionless, the sound of that single sentence still echoing in my chest. Lucia was gone. Edward was gone. The children's truths had been stripped bare. Yet somewhere, out in the quiet sun of Cadiz, another thread waited. One last knot in a story that refused to end. I sat at the desk, opened a fresh page in the notebook, and wrote 4 words in the center. Find the 4th child. Outside, the first snow of the new day began to fall again, soft, unhurried, as if the world were erasing its own footprints. The flight crossed a sheet of cloud so bright it looked like a sea turned upside down. I closed my eyes and listened to the engines until the sound settled into my bones. When I opened them, the map on the small screen showed a slow arc toward the south. Spain waited at the end of it. A coast I had never walked. A name I could not stop repeating under my breath. Eva Morales. Amanda had arranged the introductions with the caution of someone moving glass through a crowded room. There would be no police on the first day, no reporters, no one from the court. Only 2 women in a small town near Cadiz and whatever the tide chose to carry to shore. I landed under a sun that felt larger than ours. The air tasted of salt and orange. A driver with a cardboard sign took my bag and said little. We drove past low white houses with blue doors and laundry floating like prayer flags. The road narrowed until it became a ribbon between fields. When the car stopped, it was in front of a building the color of sand. An old woman sat on a step peeling an orange with a knife so thin I could see light through the peel. She looked up once, nodded toward a door and kept peeling. Inside, the room smelled of soap and lemon. A table stood under a window. On the table lay a bowl of shells, a glass bottle with a single stem, and a photograph in a small tin frame. A woman entered quietly and closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Santos," she said. "I am Eva." Her voice was low and steady, the same voice I had heard whisper through the chaos of the supper. She was smaller than I expected, the size of a person who has learned to live along walls when rooms grow dangerous. Her hair was the color of winter sunlight. Her eyes were the blue of a deep morning. She did not offer a hand. I was grateful. Some mornings the body cannot carry one more gesture. We sat. For a time the only sound was the slow sweep of the wind against the window. She poured water from a clay jug and pushed the cup toward me. I drank without tasting. "You were at my house," I said at last. "Yes," she answered. Briefly. I did not enter the room. I stood in the hall and listened because I needed to know if he had left anything else that could break what is left. When I heard what you gave them, I said the sentence without meaning to. It was not wise. "Why did you come at all?" "Because the 4th lives," she said. "And because news travels quickly when people begin to use the law. I did not want the 4th to be found by men who still think papers make families." She reached for the photograph in the tin frame and turned it toward me. A young woman stood in shallow water with a net in her hands. The sun lit her from behind. The net hung like a second horizon at her knees. Her face was turned away, but the line of her net caught me with the shock of something known. "Her name?" I asked. "Alma," Eva said. "She chooses that name. She was born months after the others. Lucia was already sick, and the doctor said she needed rest. Edward knew there would be a 4th. He made plans. So did we. We. The word was a door and a key in the same breath. Lucia asked me to keep one child far from money and from men with polished shoes," Eva continued. "I took the baby and I left the town where papers were written. We went to a village where no one asked about fathers. I changed my name. I worked at a clinic 3 days a week and took in washing on the 4th. When Alma could walk, we walked to the sea every day. When she could read, she read tide tables and weather reports. When she could choose, she chose the water." I looked at the photograph again. Alma at the lip of the ocean, holding her net the way other children hold a book bag. I set the frame down and felt the table steady under my fingers. "Did Lucia know?" I asked. "For a time," Eva said. "Then she did not. Death ends the questions a person is allowed to ask and answers nothing about the ones that remain." We sat with that sentence. The house breathed around us. A fishing boat turned somewhere beyond the window and the sound reached us as a long soft line. I did not come to take anyone, I said. I did not come for money. I do not want Alma to carry even a shadow of what I had to carry. Eva's mouth softened. You came for truth. I came to find the end of it, I said. If there is one. She rose, went to a cabinet, and returned with a small parcel wrapped in linen. The cloth had been washed so many times it felt like water under my hands. She placed it in front of me and waited for me to open it. Inside lay a letter sealed with the kind of cheap wax that cracks too easily. The seal was broken. The edges had turned the color of tea. On the outside, in a hand I had only seen in photographs, were the words for the woman who will love them when I cannot. I could not speak. She wrote that when she understood what Edward had done, Eva said. She did not know your name. She did not know if you would be gentle. She only knew that the children would need a kindness she could not reach from where she was going. My hands trembled once and then went still. I opened the letter. The paper had thinned with years. The ink had bled in places where tears had fallen and dried. It was not long. Did not accuse. It named each child as if saying a prayer into the quiet. It asked for the sort of care that costs the giver more than it can ever repay. It asked whoever would read it to teach them to love cleanly, and to leave rooms that try to make them choose between truth and belonging. At the end there was a line that seemed to speak across the space between graves and kitchens, between the back of a hospital room and a small house by the sea. Tell them they came from a place where water meets light, Lucia had written. Tell them they were loved where no one could see. I folded the letter with reverence I did not know I had carried with me. I looked at Eva. May I keep a copy? You may keep the letter, she said. It was always for you. I was only the bridge. I will tell Alma that I gave it to the person it reached for. I reached for my bag and placed on the table a small envelope I had carried like a second pulse since I left the hotel. Inside were copies of the genetic record and a photograph of Lucia in the sun. On the back I had written one sentence. The story will no longer be written by men who lie. I brought this in case you needed to show anyone why you built a life far from banks, I said. No one here will ask for it. But sometimes proof is a shield even in villages that understand love without papers. Eva slid the envelope toward her side of the table. She did not open it. She placed her palm over it as if feeling its temperature. Do you want to see Alma? She asked. The question landed like a wave that knows exactly how much of the shore to take. My mouth said yes before my mind could list the reasons to wait. We walked the narrow street slowly. The bell in the church tower counted our steps down into the afternoon. The light shifted until the white walls became gold. At the edge of the town the sea stretched out like a memory that had been waiting for someone to claim it. Two figures stood in the shallows mending a net. One was a boy no more than 12. The other was a young woman with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back with a strip of blue cloth. She turned when she heard our feet in the sand. Her face was Lucia's face and also her own. Not a copy. A continuation. Sun had drawn a soft color on her skin. Salt had made a fine lace at the edge of her hair. She smiled without fear. She did not know the story I carried to her. She did not know the rooms I had emptied to reach this shore. Eva called her name. Alma waved, put the net in the boy's hands, and walked toward us with the rhythm of a person who trusts the ground. Eva kept her voice gentle. This is Romina, she said. She has come from very far away to bring a letter, and to return a voice to the place it was meant to live. Alma looked at me and tipped her head the way some birds do when they are curious. Are you the one from the recordings? She asked. The one who said family should be honest. My throat tightened. Yes, I said. She nodded. Good, she said simply. Then we can talk. We sat on the sand. The tide inched forward and considered our shoes with interest. I gave her the letter. She read it without hurrying. When she reached the end, she pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. The sea filled the space where words might have gone. I do not want money, she said when she opened them. I do not want courts. I do not want men who knock on doors with papers in their hands. I want the truth to reach the others without hurting the part of them that is still child. Can that happen? It can happen carefully, I said. It will not happen quickly. But I will carry it as if it were a glass bowl and the path were full of steps. She smiled a little. Then you may tell them I exist, she said. You may tell them my name is Alma, because I wanted a word that means what I am when I am not afraid. Soul. The sun lowered one palm toward the line of the water. The boy brought the net, and Alma rose with the easy grace of someone who has learned how to move with currents rather than against them. She gathered the threads and showed me how to find where one knot had loosened. Everything breaks, she said. But you can close what breaks if you know where to look. I watched her fingers move and thought how strange it is that the final door in a long house of secrets can be a simple piece of string. When we stood to leave, Alma touched my sleeve lightly. You were a mother even if the papers say different, she said. You were a mother because you held hands that were not your own and you fed mouths that learned your name. Keep that and walk forward. I did not cry. The sea did it for me. It lifted and fell and lifted again and said nothing and said everything. We walked back through the narrow street. The old woman on the step had finished her orange. She looked at my face and then at Eva's and then at the sky and seemed satisfied with whatever answer she found there. I thanked Eva at the door. She put her hand over mine for a moment, bone to bone. Then she let go. At the hotel, the room smelled of new sheets and dust. I sat at the small desk and wrote what needed to be written. A record for the court that did not include a name, only a request that no one search for what has chosen to be found slowly. A letter to each of the 3 children, sealed but not stamped, that said only this: you are loved where no one could see. A message to Amanda that read, please protect a quiet village from loud men. I placed Lucia's letter on the bedside table where a lamp would watch over it. I turned off the light and lay down. The sea kept breathing on the other side of the wall. It carried me into the first true sleep I had felt in years. I woke with the sound of gulls arguing over a slice of morning. The light through the curtains was the color of peeled lemons. The sea had moved closer in the night and left a wet line at the edge of the sand, as if it had signed its name and gone. I walked down to the water before breakfast. The town was still half asleep. A boy on a bicycle carried bread in a basket and greeted me with a nod. A dog trotted past with its nose in the wind, undecided between fish and bakeries. I stood where the sand turned firm and let the foam reach my ankles. The cold took something from me that I no longer needed. When I returned to the room, my phone was learning how to be a bell. Messages lined the screen like beads. Amanda first. The court has granted extended orders. Funds remain frozen. The board has resigned. A receiver has been appointed for the foundation. We hold the line. Another from Margaret. Your oldest met with a man who left without smiling. Your daughter took her children to her mother-in-law and returned home alone. Your youngest moved money he will not find. They are quiet now. They are listening. There was a third message from a number that still had no name. It contained a single photograph. Not of a face. Not of a city. It was the surface of water at dusk with a hand reaching in and a small fish lifting free. The caption read, for the days when you forget that saving is a verb. I sent the image to a folder and left it there. Some gifts are better when they are not set on a table. I packed slowly. There was no rush to return to a place I had already left. On the way to the airport, I asked the driver to stop by the post. I did not mail the letters to my children. I asked the clerk to hold them under register, and to send them in 1 week to the addresses on the envelopes. Time needed to soften its edges. Truth needed to learn the tone of its own voice. Back in the city, winter waited with its old mouth. The sky had forgotten how to be blue. The hotel elevator smelled of polished brass and tired perfume. The concierge handed me a small box with my room number written in careful ink. Inside was the recorder and a note from the night manager. We found this at the edge of the lobby bar. It carries a voice you have already heard. There was no signature. There did not need to be. I played the last minutes. The whisper again, but this time followed by a small laugh that knew it was dangerous. The laugh was not cruel. It sounded like a person who had just found a door she thought would be locked, and discovered it would open with a touch. I kept the recorder. I placed it in the bottom of my bag and left it there. The story did not need more sound. It had found its own silence. Amanda met me in the afternoon. We sat in a room where the walls were softened by books. She poured tea and did not speak until I finished the first cup. How is Spain? She asked. It is a place where the sea knows what to do with secrets, I said. They dissolve until the pieces are small enough to carry. Good, she said. Here the pieces have become bricks. People are building narratives. We cannot stop that. But we can choose where to stand when the structure rises. What is next? The formal audits will take months, she said. The hearing will widen. There will be questions about the past that will never be answered cleanly. Do you wish to press charges beyond what we have already put in motion? I thought of Leonardo's tidy anger, of Clara's restless hands, of Julian's smile that always looked for a camera. I thought of 3 children upstairs on the night of the supper, safe because they were far from the table. I thought of Alma mending her net with quiet fingers. I want the world to be safer than the rooms where they learn to lie, I said. If the law can teach that lesson, then let the law speak. But I will not speak cruelty into a story that already has enough of it. Amanda nodded. Then we proceed as we are, she said. We protect your house. We protect your name. We do not let a single page be taken without the ink that explains it. She slid a folder across the table. This is a deed transfer to the charity you named. It creates a gallery in your house when you choose. A place for glass and for light. You asked for a way to keep the rooms from becoming a museum of grief. I touched the folder. The paper under my fingers felt alive. Yes, I said. Let the walls learn a new language. On the 3rd day I returned home. Snow had fallen again while I was gone. The path to the door looked clean, as if someone had swept the past to the sides. Inside, the house waited with the patience of old things. The dining room had been cleared. The table was bare. The chandelier did not tremble. The mantel held only a single candle and the small brass key that had begun this winter. I picked up the key and weighed it in my hand. It was lighter than I remembered. I placed it in a bowl by the door with other small metal lives and left it there. In the study I opened the safe and removed the envelopes I had prepared for the authorities and for the board. I carried them to the post and watched them vanish through a slot. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt a slow steadying, the way a ship feels when it finds the right depth. At sunset I walked to the lake. The ice had begun to break in long clean seams. Geese traced their old letters across the sky. A child on the path threw bread to nothing and laughed at the shape of his own hand. My phone rang once. A number I knew well. I let it go to the place where voices wait when they are not ready to be heard. A second later a message appeared. It was from Clara. There were no accusations in it. No demands. Only a line that said, I read the letter you sent. I do not know how to hold it yet. But I am trying. I stood very still and let the cold teach me how to breathe. I wrote back with a sentence that had learned how to live in me during the weeks of cutting and lifting. Take your time. Truth does not drown. Night came gently. Stars found their places as if returning to seats in a familiar hall. I walked home with my hands in my coat and my eyes on the lights that warmed behind the glass. In the kitchen I lit the candle on the mantel and set Lucia's letter beside it, as if it might like the company of a small flame. I played the piano with the soft pedal pressed. The notes moved through the house like steps on a stair I had always wanted to climb. On the last chord I let my hand stay on the keys and listen to the sound thin and then leave. I went to the window and looked at my reflection. She looked like someone I would sit beside on a train. She looked like someone who would pass me a napkin when my cup spilled. She looked like a woman who could hold a life without needing it to be something it was not. People will call it revenge. They will say it like a recipe or like a weather report. They will miss the point. What happened in this house was not the victory of a clever plan over a cruel one. It was a release. A letting go of roles that had turned to stone. A quiet placing of truth where everyone could see it and decide for themselves whether to live with it. The glass did not really shatter. It finally stopped reflecting what was not there. I turned off the lights and left the candle to keep a small watch. Upstairs, the rooms breathed as if they were sleeping for the first time. I stood in the doorway of each and placed a hand on the frame like a blessing. In my own room I opened the window an inch and let the winter in. On the bedside table, Alma's photograph lay beside a clean page. I wrote a line without thinking where it had come from. Freedom does not always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from closing the door you were told to keep open and walking toward the one that was always yours. I set down the pen. I slept without dreams. In the morning I would begin the gallery. I would choose pieces that bend light into colors you can carry in your pocket. I would ask the town to come and sit under the chandelier that no longer trembled. I would tell them that glass teaches the same lesson every day. It is fragile and it is strong. It breaks and it can be remade. It remembers the fire that shaped it and still holds water without spilling it. I blew out the candle and the room went soft. Somewhere outside, ice loosened its hold on the shore. The house did not sigh this time. It simply breathed.